Good morning and welcome to this Public Scrutiny Board held today in the Council Chamber here at Runcorn Town Hall and with the members of the public joining us online. These meetings are an important opportunity for open conversation about policing across our county. Our role here is to bring clarity, accountability and assurance to the public we all serve. Neighbourhood policing will be at the central focus of today. There has been an understandable public interest recently, particularly following changes affecting local PCSO numbers. Communities want to know what this means for visibility, for confidence and for the day-to-day support they receive. The session today is about seeking that reassurance and checking that the policing offer remains strong, accessible and capable of responding to local concerns. We're operating in a period of real financial pressure with forces across the country having to make difficult decisions in response to funding constraints and wider national cost challenges. These pressures have shaped many of the operational choices being made locally and nationally, and it's important that we explore how these wider influences are affecting neighbourhood policing, resource allocation and long-term planning. At the same time, I want to be clear that these changes are not being made at the expense of other critical areas of policing. What I want to understand is that this is about rebalancing, not reducing the overall service. And I want reassurance that we are maintaining strong neighbourhood visibility while also keeping response investigations, safeguarding and specialist capabilities resilient. That is why we are looking at overall performance as well, so we can be confident that the wider policing offer remains robust here in Cheshire. Ultimately, I want to be assured that the public continues to receive a confident, visible and effective service, and today's discussion is about understanding how that balance is being delivered in practice. As usual, I will be the only one asking questions, introducing each theme so that those watching can understand not only what is being asked, but why. Today in the room we have Chief Constable Mark Roberts and Paul Woods, responsible for performance and oversight. Can we move to the minutes, please? I'd like to propose that we approve the minutes of the previous public scrutiny held last month. Before I start asking my questions, I'll now invite our Chief Constable to offer an introduction.
Thank you. And just to preface a couple of things, initially you pick on quite rightly. First of all, it's a challenging picture nationally, but I think there's always a danger when people make commentary, even some of my fellow Chief Constables, about the nature of policing and where we are.
Let's just bear with while we've got a technical problem.
So, as I was saying, I think it's right to make a point, just for some context. I think there's a lot of commentary around potential police reform, and even from some fellow Chief Constables about pining about the state of policing and the danger is they always make general statements, suggesting that the policing in all areas is on the same basis. I challenge that clearly, because I think there is a marked difference in the performance of forces around the country. And I think it's fair to say on any objective basis, we're in a positive position compared to many others. I think it is sometimes confusing for the public when they hear statements being made on a national basis and think, well, what does that mean for me or us? And so I think it's important that we have these meetings just to be able to make clear to the public of Cheshire the policing service that they're getting as distinct to anything from the national perspective. So with that caveat, the constabulary continues to perform well across all the key measures in the police and crime plan. 999 calls are being answered more quickly than last year, with 95% answered in 10 seconds or less. I think generally the weekly average is about 4 or 5 seconds for a 999 call. The average answer time for non-emergency calls is just over 3 minutes, with an abandonment rate of just over 9%. On occasion, that's because they get to the point in the voice message where it signposts them to alternate means to make contact with the police. Again, just for context, Just over 5 years ago, the average wait time was around about 23 minutes for non-emergency calls. It's now 3 minutes, which speaks to the significant improvements. You'll be aware that emergency incidents are attended on average in 8 minutes. That's against the national target of 15 minutes, and grade 2 prompt incidents in 35 minutes. And over the last few months, we are attending around 80% of grade 3 incidents within 24 hours. That's clearly when they're not an urgent one, and we often will come to an arrangement with the member of the public when to go and see them. Just in terms of that point on the grade 1 target of 15 minutes, there's been some discussion nationally about whether or not to move that to a 20-minute threshold with rural areas. Cheshire, as you'll be aware, has got urban areas, but we've also got a good deal of rural areas within the border. Our geography is bigger than Merseyside and Manchester put together. We will not be going to a 20-minute target for rural areas. We will maintain service to our rural communities of the 15-minute target, which we comfortably meet and exceed on a routine basis. Recorded crime continues to fall, with a further 2% reduction in the last year, which is the 5th year in succession we've had a reduction of crime. The proportion of offences brought to justice is increasing, and we continue to have the highest charge rate for crime in the country. My focus when I returned to the force was to protect the most vulnerable in our communities and bring those that do them harm to justice. We continue, quite rightly I think, to focus on it, and Performance Pack shows we continue to increase the proportion of domestic abuse offences brought to justice, up almost 2 percentage points on last year. And we do quote the numbers on many occasions just to try and give an evidence basis to the assertions I make. But clearly we are acutely aware that behind every statistic is a victim, a member of the public. So we talk in those numbers to demonstrate that we are doing a really effective job. But make no mistake, we are acutely aware about the need that we're protecting vulnerable people. And as I say, we are talking about people here, not numbers. Sexual offences brought to justice have also increased on last year, and we have one of the highest charge rates in the country. Stalking and harassment offences brought to justice have also increased, and again, we have the highest charge rate in the country, often championed by our award-winning harm reduction unit. Again, I think we're still only one of 4 forces in the country to have that facility, which I fail to understand why people wouldn't all have such a unit. Recorded knife offences is also reducing, and the proportion brought to justice is up. The pack also shows that serious firearms offences are rare. Again, that's a testament to some of the work that the public won't see tackling county lines and organised crime. We sit between Manchester, Merseyside and Birmingham, all areas with significant gun crime problems, although they've all brought them down significantly over the years. But I think it's a testament to proactive work we do, often covert in nature, that prevents gun crime seeking into the county when we are surrounded by places with significant gun crime or gun-enabled organised crime groups. Our focus on violence also contributes to a low homicide rate, with Cheshire being one of the safest counties in the country, the 5th lowest for the homicide rate. Neighbourhood crime such as burglary and vehicle crime is also down, with almost a 6% reduction in the last year. We also have low rates of neighbourhood crime compared to other areas, with the 5th lowest rate of burglary and robbery and 6th lowest for vehicle crime nationally out of the 43 territorial forces. While the constabulary is performing very strongly across almost all areas, at the moment there are a number of challenges to future performance, including, as you're well aware, Commissioner, the medium-term financial strategy, which shows that we need more than a further £17 million savings over the next 5 years. Of particular note, and it's one that we might touch on again, the Crime and Sentencing Bill, which comes into effect in April, will see a sustained increase in demand on our specialist public protection and offender management team. In effect, the government's policy around offenders means that fewer offenders will be sent to prison. Often those who may have attracted up to 3 years will now be sentenced to community punishments, and the pressure on the prison service is being alleviated by releasing people into the community, moving the burden from the prison service to the police to try and manage and protect our communities. A national assessment provided to the Home Office estimates that the cost to Cheshire alone will be more than £1.5 million a year to manage this increased demand moved from the prison service. Demand is significantly increasing in order to protect the most vulnerable in our society. The number of registered sex offenders which require managing is forecast to increase by over 35% by 2030, which would require more than 45 additional offender manager police officers in Cheshire to maintain current levels and manage that demand. In part, we're victims of our success here because we are so effective at charging sex offenders, particularly around OK, which is abuse of children online and in real world, which means that more and more people are going on sex offenders register, and we are creating more demand for when those people come out of prison, which will be sooner than it was previously, as we have to manage them in the community. Crime likely to protecting vulnerable people resource has more than doubled since 2018, when it represented less than 9% of all crime. Last year it was 23%, and by 2029 is forecasted to be at 29% of all our crime. It points to the workforce mix that we're going to require going forward. The high harm crimes are increasing, and that demand will continue to grow. Without additional resources, these changes will lead to officers likely to be abstracted from neighbourhood policing to meet statutory public protection requirements. Challenges around visible patrol, problem-solving activity and community engagement. Neighbourhood teams increasingly being drawn into reactive risk management rather than preventative local policing, and the ability to sustain public confidence through visibility, reassurance and early implementation being effective. We are conscious of those challenges, and we will absolutely ensure that we minimise any impacts and we keep the proactive approach that we've taken.
Thanks, Chief Constable. That's a very thorough update on the situation that we have in the county and what potentially is on the horizon. So I'm now going to move us into the deck. As is normal, we don't go through every slide, but we talk to individual slides where I've got questions that are directed from myself or a combination of what the public have fed in and my own office. So, before we get into the detail on neighbourhoods, I do want to start with how the public are experiencing the service at the first point of contact. A good complaints process is essential in policing, and it's one of the clearest indicators of how well the organisation listens and learns and responds when things don't go as they should. And we've had a rise in complaints doesn't automatically mean the service is getting worse. It can obviously mean that people are more confident in speaking up. But either way, complaints shine a light on the public's lived experience and help identify patterns that may exist. So with that in mind, slide 8 shows the complaint levels, and complaints have increased by 22% this year. What analysis have you undertaken to understand whether this reflects service pressures or in fact improved confidence in the reporting process?
Yeah, obviously quite right, Commissioner. We do scrutinise this to try and identify any trends, issues or things where we can put in remedial action, and there has been a steady increase in the volume of complaints since June of last year. The complaints raised appear to relate to a number of very different areas of policing, both in terms of geography around the county and the nature of the issue being raised. So there's no single factor that's leaping out as causal. The increase appears in the main to relate to general service-related issues, such as crime updates, outcomes, actions or inactions taken following a call for service. We have seen an increase in what appear to be AI-generated or assisted complaints. They are often very lengthy, try and talk in pseudo-legal language, and AI facility has made it a lot easier to complain, covering more points in ostensibly greater detail, which all need working through. Also worthy of note, we've had a period of ongoing officer recruitment with significant numbers of younger in-service officers in frontline roles on response and AIT. A real focus for us on the last year and the year going forward is around VCOP, making sure that all officers are aware of their obligations to keep people updated as to the progress of the crime, because often we'll see failure demand where people are chasing a report from the force control room, and we need officers to be on the front foot and making sure that we're giving members of the public comprehensive and frequent updates. Data is shared on a quarterly basis with local command teams across the force, and where there are any consistent themes to discuss and any officers experiencing repeat complaints are identified and actions are taken. Generally, that would be around education and focus. There is obviously a right to review in relation to all complaints, which will either be considered by the OPCC or, in more serious cases, the IOPC, depending on the nature. OPCC, obviously your Office of Commissioner, IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Complaints. Information on the number of reviews undertaken by both the IOPC and OPCC is published on the IOPC website, and the latest quarter report shows that the volume of complaints upheld on review in Cheshire is small, and the proportions upheld in Cheshire are lower than both similar force and the national average, which gives some degree of confidence, but clearly never something that we would be complacent about. There is obviously regular scrutiny of complaints and outcomes by your office.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's reassuring that there's no single pattern that the constabulary has seen within this. I'm not totally surprised by the AI-related sort of generation of complaints, or aiding in the generation of complaints. And I suppose what I am mindful of is that my office does monitor this and will continue to monitor it closely. I've also appointed my Assistant Commissioner, Jane Whalen, to liaise with the public around complaints as well, just to make sure that we are ahead of any potential patterns that may emerge if that does happen. But how are you ensuring that making a complaint remains, simple, accessible to everybody, including people with disabilities, those with language barriers, and those with limited digital access, or those who struggle with confidence in policing?
There's a variety of routes by which people can make a complaint via our own website with single online home function, the IOPC website, in person at one of the help desks, via the telephone on 101, via representatives. So you highlight where sometimes people might feel there's a challenge in making a complaint, then obviously third parties can make a complaint on behalf of them, friend, family, MP, councillor. So there's a variety of means there where people can get support. The IOPC published literature on how to make a complaint, a guide to the police complaint system, which is available in hard copy in all custody suites and the help desks, and obviously online. We do follow the IOPC guidelines, adhering to it in terms of the statutory guidance, Focus 17, which is access to the police complaint system, a young person's guide to the police complaint system, and guidelines for handling complaints of discrimination. So there's a range of means. Obviously, the OPCC supports us with the Independent Custody Visitors Scheme, your own office. There's a mechanism there. Obviously, if people feel happy to come in to the OPCC as distinct to the constabulary. So I think there's a range of methods, but obviously we're open to any others to make sure that we're aware of any issues that emerge.
Yeah, I really welcome that transparency, and I think for those who are listening, if they do have an interest or a need to make a complaint, I think you've painted a very comprehensive route of which that can be done. And of course, there's the OPCC, which, as you say, can do it, can help enable that should somebody feel uncomfortable with approaching the constabulary. Can we now move on to slide 10, which relates to the use of force? I want to turn briefly to the use of force because it has some of the highest monthly totals in recent months. And to what extent does the rise in recorded use of force reflect better or more consistent recording rather than an actual increase in use of force being used?
Well, we're obviously keen that officers follow the procedure and make sure they document any use of force. I think it's important to clarify for any members of the public listening what use of force can actually mean. It's not necessarily using equipment. It can be placing hands on someone in effect just to restrict their movement, as opposed to any great coercive force. So there's a whole range of things that will come into that. We do believe that in the main it reflects better and more consistent recording. use of force forms are scrutinised by the trainers, if there's any issues, of course, by professional standards. So it is important that we get the information so we can properly scrutinise it. Over the last year, we've deliberately strengthened our approach to recording. Officers have received clearer training on use of force, including some lower level and compliant tactics that may previously have gone unrecorded. So I think on occasions, officers didn't simply realise that by putting hands on someone and just taking hold of them to in effect arrest, it's a use of force, and it should be documented. We've made it easier and quicker for officers to submit force through our use of force app, and it's important to remember that use of force data counts forms, not people. So if a number of officers are involved in arrest, that will be multiple use of force reports that all those involved has to submit. So a single incident can generate multiple records. With strong governance, the scrutiny arrangements in place, including reviews of body-worn video, and of course all operational officers have body-worn video, so there's that independent record there to show what has happened, and that's scrutinised in a number of ways. The flip side to this is the number of officers' assaults continues to be far too high. Every night, in effect, we're seeing our officers assaulted, abused, racially abused, spat at. So the number of confrontational situations that officers are finding themselves in necessitates on many occasions there is a requirement for a use of force to protect themselves and the public.
I think that particular point you mentioned about some officers not necessarily appreciating the need to use the use of force form, but the constabulary reiterating that is very welcome. I think also reflecting the fact that, as you said in your opening sort of introduction, that we've got more younger officers coming in, and so some of this will take some time to bed in. The Police and Crime Panel did a very deep dive into training on last Friday, and I think we're really reassured by what the officers in the room were able to show and talk through what the training regime looks like. And there's going to be a planned visit to the training facility so that the people who hold me to account can see just to what extent training looks like in Cheshire. But that continuous improvement that you're referring to, that is in part why there's an increase, is obviously welcome news. I would now like to move on to neighbourhood policing. And this is obviously an area that the public feel change most directly, and where most of the questions I receive are focused. And we are seeing a shift in the neighbourhood policing model, and people are asking what that means for them. So can I start with something very practical? What level of service can the public expect from the new neighbourhood policing model, and specifically, what should they expect from their named officer?
So I think it's important to clarify in terms of, because we've used the language about a new neighbourhood policing model. The actual structure of the neighbourhood teams isn't changing. The workforce mix within them is changing in terms of a great proportion of officers as opposed to PCSOs. As you're well aware, Commissioner, neither you nor I would ever have wanted to be in a position where we're having to make people redundant, voluntary or otherwise, but it was a financial necessity that put us into that position. But moving forward, we need to make sure that we're making best use of those resources. So the actual model or structure of how we dispose our people within the communities isn't changing. It's that workforce mix. That said, we compare very well in national results. We have always retained a very strong neighbourhood footprint. You'll be aware of the 122 model. We have 9 local policing units, which are very much geographically based with beat management teams. That's very distinct to some other forces. We know from feedback just at Chiefs Council last week from the Home Office, some forces in effect say they have one neighbourhood team, which is for the whole force, whereas we have ones based on identifiable geographic townships within the county. The latest information from National Crime Survey shows that we have the second highest proportion of the public who believe their local police are doing a good or excellent job, and the third highest for overall confidence in the police, which, aligned with our strong performance on the crime figures, gives us some more of the qualitative data as well as the purely quantitative. I think moving forward, we're going to be a lot clearer on what we expect of our neighbourhood policing teams, and in particular our PCSOs. I think it's fair to say when we had the larger number of PCSOs, they were given to the beat management supervision and they were used in conjunction with the PCs as they saw fit and best. Recognising the reduction in number, we're going to be far more prescriptive about what the PCSOs are expected to do and the beat officers are expected to do, so we can be clearer to members of the public about what they will actually be doing. So one of the neighbourhood police guarantee pillars is a named contactable officer for every neighbourhood. That's our 122 model, which predates the neighbourhood policing guarantee, and we will continue that despite the changes. These are published on the internet and checked on a monthly basis. In terms then of what the public can expect, and this is where we're going to be far more rigorous and documented, the engagement minimum baseline for every beat area will be 1 surgery or drop-in session per month, visit each primary and high school every half term, visit each place of faith every 3 months, complete 1 road safety activity per month, complete a targeted street activity every month, maintain contact with parish councils, local councils and neighbourhood watch coordinators every month. This will be via email, phone or Teams unless there is a specific need to attend a meeting in person to discuss a specific issue. However, each beat will hold a quarterly in-person meeting with groups of parish councils and make regular and effective use of social media every week. One of the things we've also picked up, we just want to look at some of those really high-value community initiatives where our PCSOs lead the way to make sure that there's a handover and we keep them going, because we're not just going to do it in a robotic function. That's the baseline that will be required and monitored for every one of the teams. But there are some really positive things that our people are involved in. We want to make sure that we hand that over in a personal way to make sure that we keep those links with those key community activities.
I mean, I really welcome that that promise to continue with those engagement activities that I think the public values so much. I had one councillor who reached out to me last week and reiterated that there would be still a weekly surgery in this particular area. So I know there's ambition to make sure it's definitely a monthly, but in some areas it's clear that officers are also able to go above and beyond that requirement if that's what the local community prioritises.
I think we've got to be clear with the community to manage expectations here. Yeah. So we will commit to what I've said.
Yes, yeah.
If there is capacity to go over and above that, of course, we'd be happy to do that. But as I've said, there's going to be other demands on the beat teams.
Of course.
So we can't overpromise.
Of course.
So there'll be a clear commitment there. We are going to rigorously monitor that now in a far more robust way than we've done before, because if you've got less resource, you've got to make sure it's given its best bang for the buck, which is what we're going to do with the monitoring regime. However, if there's capacity, of course, we want our people to do more. Yeah, yeah.
No, it's reassuring. And like I say, it's not just the surgeries, it's the attendance to parish and town council meetings, it's going to places of worship. So all those different parts of a community that will still continue to have the visible policing presence that they've had, whether it was a PCSO previously or whether it's going to be a PC now, is very much welcome. And of course, the named officer, which people can find very clearly by going onto the Constabulary's website, typing in their area and having the named officer, which Cheshire has proudly championed for a very, very long time now. So an awful lot of good news there, despite necessary changes, but very clearly protecting neighbourhood policing in this county. Any reorganisation has the potential to influence public trust and confidence, so communication obviously is vital. What steps are being taken to explain these changes clearly and maintain or even strengthen confidence across different communities?
I think, as you highlight, the communication is absolutely key, because I think people can assume the worst case scenario, and actually the reality is far more positive than I think some people have feared it might be. So there's a comprehensive engagement strategy. It's been in place from the outset of the programme, and you know the difficulties we've faced with the change in budgetary positions, some negatives, some positives. So the increased precept was obviously very welcome, but the initial grant settlement by the government announced on the 18th of December was significantly worse than we anticipated, as was the level of funding provided for the neighbourhood policing uplift. So that has been in place. We've been clear to brief all the neighbourhood teams, speak to stakeholders, Now that the model has been finalised, or the staffing mix has been finalised, it's going to be formally presented by local policing unit chief inspectors to parish councils across the force area. The presentation will also be shared with members of members of Parliament, local authorities, chief execs, chairs of community safety partnerships, ensuring that there's a consistent understanding and transparency across all key partners. And I'm keen that the local chief inspectors have those conversations in person, just for those very points we've just alluded to there. If there's a specific thing of concern in a local community, I'm keen that that's raised with the chief inspectors. And if it's the case that we can do more, then obviously we'd be keen to do that. In addition, a proactive media approach has been prepared with a press release scheduled for late March to support the formal launch of the new model in April. That will be complemented by coordinated social media activity across all LPUs, introducing local teams and reinforcing community visibility.
Thank you very much. I really welcome that reassurance. I think I am also intrigued as to whether there is a standard pack that obviously is going to be circulated across the force area to, as you say, councillors and parish councils, and whether there is one that can be pulled together which is for the whole of the force area and can be sort of documented online for residents and stakeholders to be able to access. So I'd certainly like to see if that's something that the constabulary can consider, just so that it makes it easier for stakeholders in the event that they can't attend a meeting in person. They can very quickly get the pack, and obviously we would offer to make sure that was available on the OPCC website as well.
Yeah, I don't see why there's an issue. It's all public. We're being transparent about it, so yeah, I don't see an issue at all. Okay,
so changes to workforce are happening. We know that supervision, morale and well-being are key to delivering a consistent neighbourhood offer. So what is being done to support morale, supervision, quality and a positive culture within neighbourhood policing during this period of change?
So again, I think, you know, it's this point about the workforce mix. Clearly there's been some concern from PCSOs who are potentially affected by the change, and that's where the focus has most keenly been. It's worthy of note, and I think it's worth emphasising that we haven't made anyone compulsory redundant. That's clearly a more regrettable situation. We had more volunteers for voluntary redundancy than we actually had the need to make people redundant. So no one's been forced into redundancy. It is a voluntary thing. So I think that mitigates some of the concerns that there might have been. In terms of that then, the broader officers, I think they're welcoming the additionality of constables. Certainly when I've been around the force on Q&As, there is positivity about the enhanced enforcement capability that brings, as well as the engagement. Clearly, there's an extensive wellbeing offer for all officers and staff, which is contained and referenced in our wellbeing booklet. Candidly, it is a constant challenge, no matter how much we publicise it. You'll always find someone who isn't aware of the offer, so we keep pushing it through every possible means to try and make sure that people are aware of it. Supervisors and managers all receive leadership training, which includes the importance of staff wellbeing. We have a HR business partner model where all departments have a designated HR support locally. Our performance and talent conversations, some might describe them as appraisals. They're called different things in different places. We call them performance talent conversations. They're actively used to ensure every individual can discuss their performance and wellbeing. Each LPU has a wellbeing room which is available for respite breaks, and as I mentioned, my Q&A sessions, I get around all the LPUs and HQ just to have a chat with staff face to face. And certainly after the last round, I came away really positive with the attitude, motivation and commitment to the public shown by all the staff. It was really quite an uplifting series of visits. The force chaplains are always readily available in particular issues. Beat management, sergeants and inspectors have been actively involved in shaping the new model through a dedicated focus group, ensuring that we're taking their views into cognizance with the design of it and that staff were meaningfully engaged. All PCSOs have been invited to a dedicated FAQ session, and 3 briefing events have now been scheduled across the force for police officers to make sure that everyone understands properly what we are doing. These sessions will clearly explain the new roles and associated performance framework while providing an opportunity for open discussion and for questions or concerns to be addressed. The final thing to say on that is that, notwithstanding the impact on the PCSOs, in terms of changes to the force operating model, this in effect is nowhere near as big as when we introduced the area investigation teams. That was in November 2022 when we moved the response teams from a 5-block pattern to a 4-block pattern. So that was with change, that was consulted obviously with the Police Federation, and we introduced the area investigation teams to manage workloads. That, I think it's fair to say, was a far more significant change in the model. It impacted on far more people, and that has been successfully accomplished, and we're now seeing the benefits of that in terms of the improved outcomes across all crime categories, as well as the improvements of VCOP compliance. So again, we'll take any lessons from that to work into this, but that was actually a far more challenging change to the system than what we're currently doing with readjusting the workforce mix in the beat teams.
Well, thanks for that thorough answer. I obviously welcomed the voluntary redundancies, and that was done through an awful lot of hard work, getting out and about, talking to the public about what we could do if we had extraordinary preset flexibility. And what we did get, you are right to point out, prevented some of those compulsory redundancies, which none of us wanted to see happen. And I also was pleased to see that Unison, trade union for staff in the constabulary, were commenting publicly around that over the last week, which I'm really pleased to see that they saw that as a really significant benefit to employee morale. And of course we'll have the staff surveys and police officer surveys so we can benchmark what that's saying to us relative to the previous year. Of course we will. But I now want to talk about visibility, because this obviously, you've already alluded to where events are going to continue, which is a good thing. And I receive a huge amount of questions relating to visibility, but with fewer PCSOs, many people do want that reassurance that presence won't decline, particularly in areas affected by antisocial behaviour. So how will you ensure that communities don't see or even feel a drop in visibility or reassurance, especially in locations where daily presence really matters? And we know that that varies across this county, but it's an important question.
Absolutely, but it's very difficult to guarantee a perception. Until now, there's been no benchmark about what the actual visibility is from PCSOs in particular. What we're going to have going forward, as I've described, is that, in effect, contracts about what we are going to deliver. There might have to be some acceptance and compromise on some members of the public. I think some of the activity, whilst very much welcomed, probably doesn't track through into deliverables that the policing should be responsible for. Clearly, where there are crime patterns and antisocial behaviour, they will be targeted and prioritised, and you will continue to see that enhanced presence. In terms of what we're going to do, the model that we're moving to, or the shifting emphasis with staff, it's been explicitly designed around the 5 national neighbourhood policing guarantees, which is 1, police back on the beat. You know that we're putting significant numbers of officers back on the beat. The issues such as antisocial behaviour or crime that give people most concern require warranted powers. So there's going to be more of an enforcement presence there to deal with those issues. Community-led policing, while we're retaining that structure with the named officer and teams associated with each of our geographic areas. Really importantly, clear performance standards and professional excellence. That's something now that we are going to rigorously enforce to ensure that we are making optimum use of our resources. Crack down on antisocial behaviour. Well, yes, of course, we will continue to target those areas. And safer town centres, where we've had considerable success in tackling those issues. We're going to have the performance and assurance frameworks, which will work along those commitments, crucially enabling us to demonstrate the impact, consistency and accountability. So it will give us the evidence base so that when I'm offering reassurance to this forum or the public, we can actually give them that evidence to say this is what you're getting. So we'll take it away from non-specified perception to actually a clear understanding of what we're delivering and we can account for. I've already mentioned the minimum standards of engagement in response to a previous question. Beat managers, management sergeants and inspectors are expected to routinely analyse crime pattern trends, including antisocial behaviour, with the findings reviewed weekly to inform targeted patrol plans and structured problem-solving activity. And each area has a problem-solving team, because what we want to avoid is just simply throwing yellow jackets at a problem. The problem-solving teams are there to bring an evidence base, understand what the drivers of crime are or the issues, and to put longer-term solutions in, often working in conjunction with partners.
I really welcome the new standards that you refer to with regards to visibility that can now be benchmarked, and that will be something that I'm sure the Policing Crime Panel will take a real interest in as well. And those emphasis around, being back on the beat, antisocial behaviour, safer town centres, that is all really, really welcome. And I think it will, hopefully, in the not too distant future, the public will start to feel the benefit of this. And I would also say, when I visited South Yorkshire, and appreciate you, the previous Deputy Chief Constable there, understanding how problem solving was a problem prior to the neighbourhood policing changes, to hear you say about the importance of problem solving still being there, and if anything being sort of turbocharged, intensified, is a welcome reassurance. Another concern that is raised with me is around abstraction and neighbourhood officers being pulled away from neighbourhood policing to support response demand, which of course can happen when there is serious incidents happening. But what safeguards are in place within the new model to protect neighbourhood capacity and to prevent those neighbourhood officers being routinely abstracted?
This is something we already closely monitor, because it is something that's frequently highlighted as a concern, so we want to understand the position. So we've already got an established abstraction policy that's now complemented by a draft national standard. I think the draft national standard offers nothing new to us, similar to when we had the rocket science told to us that we should attend burglaries and other such things, which we'd already worked out for ourselves. Our local policy clearly defines what constitutes an abstraction from neighbourhood policing and provides consistent recording of both planned and spontaneous abstractions. One of the things that we've been really clear is, if a beat officer is tasked to a task on their beat, that's not an abstraction, that's police work. So we've got to be really careful with the staff, because sometimes people think that if they're being tasked to a job, that response might do, but if it's on a beat, that's an abstraction. It's not, that's the job. The force operates to an abstraction tolerance of less than 10%. For February, the abstraction rate within beat management teams was 5.8%, remaining comfortably within the threshold. Our expectation is, with the increased number of officers, warranted officers allocated to beat, this should minimise the need for abstractions, because it plays into that point. If you're dealing with things properly in a problem-solving approach and dealing with the root cause of the issue, that reduces demand. And that was one of the reasons we had such success in South Yorkshire, because we stopped being reactive and started solving problems, and it reduced demand on the response teams. So abstraction levels are subject to regular and robust scrutiny, with performance reviewed by the Superintendent Lead for Neighbourhood Policing, the Chief Superintendent for Local Policing, and ACC Ross, through established area quarterly performance reviews.
I mean, the other thing that is worth noting, and we've started talking about it when we talk about South Yorkshire, but the fact that different forces around the country operate very different neighbourhood policing models, and we spoke about that change towards problem solving when you're Deputy Chief Constable there. People do notice the differences, and want to know what they can expect. So can you explain why different neighbourhood policing models are in place nationally, and what the rationale is for choosing the model that we are using here?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Each one of the 43 territorial forces has their own operating contact. They have their own finance. You're aware that we have historically been one of the lowest precepts in the country, compared, for example, to the Welsh forces, who've had preset flexibility for a long time. So there's the amount of resource that you can put in, there's the geography of the places as well. As I've said, some forces operate a model where they in effect have one neighbourhood, which is the force, which to me doesn't really do what neighbourhood policing should do. Yeah. So we have traditionally had the 1-2-2 model. We have that based around the local policing units. I increased the LPUs from 8 to 9 with the addition of Congleton, not long after I came back, to recognise the specific geography and locality of that particular place. Those 9 LPUs are split over the 3 broad local authority areas with 3 in each. So there's a tiered approach right from your beat officer or PCSO on the 1-2-2, up into the cluster with the sergeants, into a broader one with the inspectors, round about a whole local policing unit, then into the area and then into force. So we think that's a model that works best for us to make sure that you've got people who understand their local area, and the policing of Runcorn is very different to the policing of Northwich, is very different to the policing of Chester. So we want groups of officers commensurate with that who can understand their local community. Clearly, each Chief Constable has operational independence over tactical and operational decisions within the spending envelope sat by the Police and Crime Commissioner or Deputy Mayor. As I've said, this is absolutely fundamental to us. The concept of problem solving is a really important factor for us. I think when we look at the models and the structures, and people can get wrapped up in models and structures, I think the important thing is what's the impact? What's it achieving? You know, you don't get marks for just having a beautiful model. It's what difference does it make to the public? Well, for us, we can show that crime is down consistently, more offenders are brought to justice, our problem solving is effective, community confidence is good. When people ring us, we pick up the phone quickly, we get there quickly and we do something about it. So I think the models are important to maximise the resources that we've got. I think what we need to focus on is, are the public getting a bang for the buck? And I think every metric or survey you would look at in Cheshire would suggest that we've got a really effective model.
I mean, look, the fact that some areas view neighbourhood as one neighbourhood force-wide is a massive disappointment, because, you know, that is just simply not the case. These are very different communities, almost no matter where you are in the country. Is the reason why we have citizens' assemblies, because the 9 LPUs that you refer to absolutely have differences within them, not least the sort of socio-economic circumstances within those LPUs can vary quite significantly, especially in a place like Cheshire. And we know that that has an impact on the types of crime that can happen there. I mean, I am you know, very, very supportive of the 1-2-2 model, but I also think we get an awful lot of pushback from residents around the fact that lots of housing estates have been added in to areas since that was introduced, and the remodelling of that is probably long overdue now. I know there's more discussions to be had around that, but I know I've made my thoughts clear on that. But my next question really relates to what the government is expecting from forces in terms of neighbourhood policing, visibility and community engagement, and how you feel those expectations are now shaping our local decisions.
So, as I say, we had a really strong neighbourhood footprint before the emphasis on the neighbourhood policing from the current government. Our approach has been explicitly designed around the government's 5 pillars, which is police back on the beat. We've talked about that. Community-led policing, where we've got the name contactable officer, responsible to local problems, clear performance standards and professional excellence. I think that is something, again, where we're going to excel with the information, and we've had conversations, Commissioner, about the use of pocket money to secure a couple of alternate systems where we can really get that granular detail, not just to retrospectively review performance, but proactively in an intelligence-led way make sure that we're deploying staff in the most effective way around those key areas. Crack down on antisocial behaviour, well, yeah, that's absolutely something that we are keen on, and that's not just for the neighbourhood policing teams. We get great support from our legal services branch, who are very proactive in taking matters to the court, whether it's community protection notices, closure orders, a whole range of preventative orders. We are incredibly proactive on those. And then, of course, safer town centres. Really keen that we maintain that. Again, I will mention the sentencing review. We all know that shop theft is a key thing. With some of the sentencing thresholds now, the ability of the court to award custodial sentences for shoplifting offences is going to be significantly reduced. So in terms of the deterrence effect, a policy change in that area is going to make it hard for us to deliver on one of the other priorities around shop crime and town centre crime, when offenders know it's less likely that they will receive a custodial sentence.
Yeah, I mean, safer town centres is an absolute priority for the government. That's clear. It's certainly a priority for us here in Cheshire. I think we were a county of market towns, and so the look and feel and safety of the high street is absolutely vital to driving inward investment, pride in place, all the things that rightly are a top priority for members of the public and all of us in this room here today. So I think the sentencing guidelines presents challenges, undeniably. I'm also alive to the conversations that I had to have in the first few weeks of being elected Police and Crime Commissioner, which is the prison population was about to be breached, and a government calling an election meant that there weren't the mechanisms in place to protect the functioning of the criminal justice system, unless an incoming government made a very quick change, which was absolutely necessary. But I am alive that the more community sentencing will potentially have adverse consequences, and we need to do everything we can to inform decision makers in government of the possible consequences, and hope that we can get additional funding or get some changes to how they're currently implementing it. I think that's the job for those of us in politics, to try and get the ear of other politicians and protect our communities from unintended consequences. But I would now like to turn to the performance data and see what that is telling us. Neighbourhood crime, and you've repeated this, has fallen overall. But I envisage the picture is not the same everywhere. Which neighbourhoods are contributing most to the fluctuations that we've seen? And what targeted activity is underway to stabilise demand?
So, as you say, it will vary, and it's ever been thus. You're going to get different crime patterns in different areas, and particularly when some of our crime levels are really low because of the reductions we've made, a slight change will be disproportionately effective in a percentage. So, of our three main areas around which the force is structured, each has seen a reduction in line with the force level. So in the east of the county, it's down by 6.7%, the north 4.1%, and the west 6.2%. And those percentages are year on year. So if one area's had a particularly good reduction the year before, then it's reflected in the next year. At the LPU level, we've seen particularly big decreases in Runcorn, which is nice, as we're sat in Runcorn, where there's been an 18.8% reduction, which is very significant and impressive. Widnes down 16%, Chester down 12.5%. Northwich, and this is the danger of percentages, there was an increase of 5 offences year on year, which is marginal. I think we'd agree that could be a spate of shopliftings on an afternoon, so I wouldn't be over concerned about that. Warrington saw an 8.3% increase, but again, Warrington, the biggest LPU, we just need to be careful of those numbers. You share my concern about the council's decisions about CCTV. Only this week, I think we had a sex offender sentenced who was identified by live monitoring by the CCTV and was able to deploy officers to it. I think you share my concerns. If we're not proactively monitoring, what does that do to us being able to protect retail outlets and direct officers at the right time to make arrests and interventions? There's a range of factors which can influence the comparisons at an LPU level. Large-scale events as Creamfields, a serial or repeat offenders going on a blitz, that can radically change things. We've seen this recent examples of this in Warrington, where we had a series of burglaries. Thankfully, we've arrested those suspects, and we have an excellent capability to identify and bring these offenders to justice. And I think it's worth noting that whilst it's neighbourhood crime, sometimes the solution to this isn't neighbourhood resource. So I think what we're very adept as a force, and I'm really pleased with the attitude of people, is we don't work in silos. So if we see a series of offences that's inflicting harm on a community, such as burglaries, then we can call in specialist assets from the covert side of the house, from serious and organised crime, and we will deploy those assets against the neighbourhood problem. It's not the crime time that determines what resource, it's the level of sophistication by the criminal that then determines what level of resource we bring in to make sure that we deal with the problem. So neighbourhood policing is the bedrock, but it can't exist and function effectively without those broader force resources. You'll be well aware of a comprehensive programme of activity in support of safer streets, which enhanced our policing activity around key periods. We've got a dedicated Chief Inspector Lead for Retail Crime who has clear strategic ownership. Operation Watchmaker excuse me, is a force-wide initiative focused on retail crime with dedicated weeks of intensive action taking place, further complemented by deployment of innovative tactics such as the recent use of live facial recognition in Chester. As a force, we've made outstanding use, I think, of retrospective facial recognition, where we will link offenders caught on CCTV at scene to the database of known criminals in the system. In line with national guidance and legislation and case law, we had the trial deployment in Chester, supported by GMP. A heavy focus on that was engaging with the public and just identifying any concerns, what their thoughts were. And I think having explained to the public what we were doing, we were incredibly reassured that the public were very supportive. I think their view was that if they're out shopping, socialising in Chester, anything which helps keeps them safe is going to be very positive. So it was a very positive initiative for us. Operation Sidelines is a hotspot policing operation that's now transited in business as usual as the funding has been pulled. We're going to keep monitoring that via effective governance to ensure that we are targeted in the right place, and crucially to track whether the efforts that we're putting in is having a positive impact on the problem we're trying to address.
I mean, there's an awful lot that you've referred to there, which is a lot of great news when it comes to neighbourhood crime across Cheshire. I think I've obviously got to pick out the 18.8% reduction in neighbourhood crime here in Runcorn. I think I appreciate your point around 5%, that sometimes that can be quite hard to feel, and also we should not run to sort of sing and shout about those. But an 18.8% reduction in neighbourhood crime in Runcorn is a real significant difference. And so absolute credit to the officers and those working in neighbourhoods in Runcorn for delivering that to the benefit of the public. The other area that I've also got to mention is, you are right, the CCTV and the invaluable nature of CCTV and the live monitoring of CCTV. And you give one example. I've met with businesses and the Business Improvement District who can give me similar examples. I've also met with the council, obviously, and they've explained about the increased pressures of adult social care and children's services, an ageing population and a society, more and more children in care. I know when I was a councillor, we had around 198 children in care in 2011, and I know Warrington, I think, has now surpassed 350. So it just goes to show the pressures that public services are under. I think the duty's on people like myself, frankly, to try and find that solution that brings the council to a position where we can have a live monitoring, working with partners, and maintain the sort of quality of service that the police have benefited from, and potentially even supersede it. That's why I went to Cumbria to see what Cumbria's CCTV system looked like, and I don't mind saying that I think it was probably the best in the country, especially with the AI embedding that was taking place. And I'm certainly sure that, I know you like to refer to Cheshire as being a place which is hostile to criminals. I think I've got that right. Hostile environment for criminals, where does that affect? I definitely think the CCTV system that Cumbria has got firmly puts itself in that category. because they were able to give us some incredible case studies that instead of having to potentially bail offenders because of the amount of work that would have gone in to pulling that case together, they were able to do that in a matter of hours, 2 or 3 hours, and be able to get guilty pleas when providing evidence, which is just a game changer, I would say, for victims of crime. So an awful lot of work in this space to applaud, and a lot more to do, undeniably, but I think it's fair to say that Cheshire's going in the right direction. Can we now move to slide 26, which refers to neighbourhood policing outcomes? I mean, the outcome rates have improved, as we've just discussed. That's all positive, and we need to understand what this really means for victims. Is the increase in outcomes having a real and positive impact, do you believe, for victims of repeat offending?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's well-known stats about the tendency for certain offenders to disproportionately commit harm by repeat offending. HMIC, in their Spotlight report on a series of quizzes of crime, have cited evidence that homes are more likely to be burgled if they've been burgled or targeted before, and that 20% of vehicle crime victims have been victims before. So it makes sense that if we're tackling those people perpetrating the crimes and we can get some meaningful sanction on them, then that will restrict their offending behaviour. Research shows that reoffending rates are higher for those convicted of robbery and theft than for other crime types, and I think that probably bears or warrants special mention to DCI or Chief Inspector Rob McLaughlin at Warrington, who's led our improved approach to robbery. We were in a position where we were at the wrong end nationally of the outcomes and detections. We're now very firmly at the top of that, and that's a testament to the work of Rob and people across the force. Burglary victims in Cheshire has a specific approach to Operation Shield. We ensure that investigations led by a PIP2 proactive team, so that's a detective with a higher level of training, with neighbourhood beat management teams to follow up and take out measures such as super cocooning, property marking. So if a house is subject to a burglary, there's a great chance that that house, but also surrounding houses, within a short period of time, are likely to suffer further offences. It's the optimal forager theory. So that's why we do the super cocooning in the area, to immediately, hopefully, deter offenders from staying in the location. As we've already mentioned, Cheshire some of the lowest rates of neighbourhood crime in the country, with the 5th lowest rate for burglary and robbery, and the 6th lowest for vehicle crime.
Again, a lot of really good news there. I think it's fair to say that reoffending is absolutely one of the problems that we've got in the criminal justice system. And last year, reoffending cost £20 billion to the taxpayer in forms of losses to the economy, but also, quite frankly, the use of police time, the use of court times, the cost of prison and probation. It's one of the reasons why we launched Fresh Start, to try and get repeat offenders into employment and off a criminal lifestyle. But that work is hard, and it takes a lot of time to embed, as I'm sure you know all too well. Do you think that the neighbourhood teams have the analytical support they need to operate proactively and identify emerging problems at an early stage?
I'll answer a specific question, but just to come back on something you said there, Commissioner. I think any attempt to rehabilitate people and cut back on their reoffending requires a level of support. We can't expect offenders just to stop offending if there isn't a wraparound with them. And some of the challenges that we're now going to see with the sentencing review, but general crime types, are going to make that an awful lot harder. So currently there are 1,660 registered sex offenders in Cheshire. By 2028, that's predicted to have gone up to 2025. That is a requirement on us to try and monitor people, because probation aren't going to have a massive uplifting resource. So that requires supervision and action by warranted officers. OK referrals, that's our online child abuse investigation teams, and I think you do a visit to them, Commissioner, to see their work. Those rose by 67% in 2025. We're forecasting this will rise by 100% by 2027 due to the NCA putting a particular focus on it and some legislative changes with the Online Harm Act. Those are all things that require officers to deal with. So the option to give a quality intervention to offenders in the community is getting harder to do because the numbers are getting bigger and our resources aren't going up. Government stats suggest that there'll be 1,530 offenders nationally to be released without PSS supervision. So again, the likelihood of those people committing further offences is going to be high. So increased demand, but with less resource to manage it. The expectation nationally is that there will be a 28% increase in reoffending. That is all stuff that we manage, and you'll be aware because we had many discussions about it, but the reduction in PCSO numbers and a shift to officers was financially driven, and if it wasn't a choice we had to make, we wouldn't have made it. Actually, events are in some way strengthening that shift because all those crime types that I'm talking about require warranted officers to deal with it. And if we're talking about crime reoffending in communities, that is something where we're going to have to increase our capacity of police officers.
Yeah. I mean, I think the use of social media through an awful lot of the crimes that you've referred to, I think is eye-watering. And I think the public at large won't appreciate that policing for a long, long time has worked really hard to make the outside world really safe, especially for young people and vulnerable people. And at the same time that that's been happening, more and more of those predators and perpetrators of crime have moved online. And I think it's probably fair to say that the social media companies are very far from the levels of regulation that other online organisations have to conform with. And I think of one example, I think of the sort of gambling industry, where you can't place bets without huge amounts of personal information being provided to them. And that's all about making sure that they adhere to the law. And it seems that when it comes to social media, it very much feels like the Wild West. And we've got predators and perpetrators of crime acting as children all the time and contacting vulnerable young people. So I do welcome the government's commitment to start consultation on the use of social media for young people, because this is not what it was intended as, a means of just keeping in touch. Increasingly now it's being used by those worst offenders in society to groom incredibly vulnerable young people. And that is a piece of work that I think is long overdue, but I'm sure colleagues in the constabulary welcome the idea that there might be a route to preventing this stuff happening online.
I mean, as I've kind of made out, we're really effective at dealing with this sort of criminality, but we're not going to arrest our way out of it. We're not going to arrest every paedophile on a computer, because the numbers are just, frankly, shocking. The fact that we're looking at 100% in OKs, I think we've quadrupled our resource in the online child abuse teams and on our digital media investigation team since it came back. And we're one of the few forces in the country that currently don't have backlogs. And that's despite a massive increase in demand. And this is the conversation we have to have with the public, and I understand the concern around PCSOs, but thankfully the majority of the public aren't aware of some of the stuff that goes on, particularly on the online space, and that's why myself and the constabulary have to sometimes make some difficult decisions based on our understanding of what the crime type is, using our professional judgment and expertise to keep the public safe, because crime typically has moved from the public space, as you say, into the private space, and that requires a different type of resource. And just to answer the question at the start of this about the analytical support, given the volumes, do I wish we could have more analytical support? Yeah, I do. but there's difficult choices. Where do I take the staff from to put that in? So it's a very careful balancing act which we work through with Paul's team and the force management statement every year to try and ensure that we've got the right capability in the right place. We do prioritise it in the Force Intelligence Bureau. Protecting vulnerable people is our priority. We've invested in the Power BI capability and data warehouses so that performance information, the preserve of Paul and command, everyone gets access to it. Excuse me. Our last HMIC inspection stated the constabulary has a good understanding of antisocial behaviour, vulnerability and repeat victims and suspects, and specifically reference to use of Power BI as well as the DITASK system and our copper curve approach to hotspot policing. So we think it's effective. It would seem to be getting results, but it's an area where we need to keep it constantly under review to make sure that we're sensibly investing to give ourselves the best intelligence so that we can effectively target all this type of crime.
Thank you for that. But as the new model embeds, how will you ensure investigative quality and timeliness continues to improve? And obviously you've given a lot of context there already, because we must make sure that these positive trends that we've had are obviously sustained.
Alluded to the introduction of the area investigation teams in November 2022 and the increased performance in outcomes has aligned with that. It's also aligned with our increased establishment of detectives, specialist PIP 2 in CID, protecting vulnerable people and other specialist roles. So in terms of the OBTJ rates, there's nothing that we're changing that should undermine the improvements we've made. In fact, it should enhance it as our AIT teams develop their experience and expertise. The key with the neighbourhood teams, they will retain some crime where it's on their neighbourhood, quite rightly. What we want from them, though, is to reduce crime by problem solving and effective beat management. And if you reduce the volumes of crime, then your outcome rates will go up. So it's two sides of it, really.
Thank you for that. I'd now like to bring us on to the final slide that we're going to look at, which relates to drug-related crime. We've seen more than a 22% rise, and people are naturally asking what this indicates. So does this increase in drug offences correlate with any rise in serious violence or exploitation-related crime across the force area?
No, drugs doesn't, in our accounts, it's not led to serious violence. We're obviously pleased about that. There's a couple of principal factors. One, you'll see from the stats that we are incredibly proactive in stop search. If someone's walking along with drugs, whether it's for personal use or for dealing, if we don't stop them and find it, then the crime will never be reported. So in some ways, it's an indicator of proactivity that we're finding more and more drugs by our proactive activity. The other issue where we've seen an increase in recorded crime is small amounts of drugs bought and delivered online. Fast parcels have driven significant amounts of drug seizures for us. They started in March 25 and has led to more than 500 additional offences recorded in the last year alone. So there's a driver from that particular MO of the drug dealers. But with drugs, if you don't look them and find them, there'll be no reported crime, but you'll have lots and lots of violence. The fact that we're very proactive and we take drugs out, our serious and organised crime unit take out really significant national and international players as well as regional ones. The beat teams are very effective at identifying in local areas. The cuckooing that goes on means we're attacking at all levels. The more we find, the more the crime goes up, but actually we're protecting the communities from harm because we're taking the drugs out and preventing that escalating into OCG rivalry about the dealing spaces.
Yeah, no, I welcome that. Look, there's an awful lot of, I think, very strong held views in this particular space, and I think I've always been very clear that I'm always very direct when asked about legalisation of drugs and whether this is something that is something really difficult. I always say we've got more than enough legal substances, and the system already really struggles to deal with the unintended consequences, abuse of that. I don't think we should be making huge amounts of more drugs available to future generations, but we've already got ones that we struggle to maintain and control and provide the wraparound support that people who have addictions to struggle with. So I really welcome the constabulary's work in this space, and the fact that we're not seeing that correlation following through to serious violence is a positive thing that sheds that the police are making sure that when drugs do arrive in this county, where we make that intervention, it's stopping a spiralling of any problems beyond that specific incident. Not
I mean, I was
always, but certainly the vast majority of occasions.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly experienced it over my career. I mean, I was a detective sergeant at DI in Longsight, and at one stage they made what I thought was a foolish decision to disband the plainclothes unit that dealt with street level dealers, and the knock-on effects of that was more people got shot. Yeah. Because if your dealers aren't being controlled, if they're allowing to expand their market, then sooner or later there'll be competition, and drug dealers tend to resort to settling trading areas with firearms and knives. So if you don't keep a handle on the distribution of drugs, then that leads into competition and serious violence. So it's something that we've absolutely got a focus on.
And I think it's probably fair to say, we spoke quite a lot today about social media, but when we have citizens' assemblies, you know, we have members of the public who, on the first of the 3 days, have an opportunity to talk very freely about their perceptions and their concerns about their community and where they live and work. Make no mistake about it, what people see on social media, which are often a lot of very violent scenes, definitely connected to offendings associated with drug offences, and it absolutely makes people fearful for where they live. And I always ask people, is this happening where you live? It's incredibly rare that someone can talk about the serious violence that they see online as a thing that happens where they actually live. But of course, it has a massive impact on people's confidence and perception of crime and the fear of the outside world. So it's reassuring that it is a top priority. And when we had at the last assembly another update from officers who came and talked about drug offences, and all those who took part in that particular workshop, when they spoke to me about it, they couldn't believe the amount of work that Cheshire Constabulary does in this space, because it absolutely is at odds with what they're seeing by their own admission online all the time. You know, we're spending hours every day, increasingly now, people seeing videos online which are not in their community, and actually now what we see, not actually real videos because of AI generated videos. So this obviously presents a huge amount of challenges for policing and the perception of crime, but it feels like in Cheshire we're in the right place on this. So I definitely encourage you to keep doing what you are in that space. But that concludes the questions for today. And we often have a section related to Commissioner's questions, but because of the neighbourhood policing, I was determined to incorporate those questions that are coming from the public into those broader questions that we've already gone through. So I thank you for answering the questions, both from myself, but also from members of the public who've wrote into my office. And on any of the business, we have nothing to raise for today. So I'd just like to thank you for your time today. Thank you for bringing the pack together, and wish you well for the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.